Given the choice between a brownie and basically anything else, I will always choose the brownie because I love them so much. But I ask, have they always been so frickin' delicious? Well, we can go back to 1904 and make one of the very first recipes for brownies to find out. So thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video as we endeavor to find the origin of brownies, this time on Tasting History. So today I've decided to make one of the oldest recipes for brownies, which seems like it would be a simple task, but it's not so straightforward. See, the very first recipe for something called a brownie is from 1896, and while it's called a brownie, it doesn't have any chocolate. Instead, it has molasses in it, so that's not really what I'm looking for. And the oldest dish that is something that we would call a brownie, made with chocolate, wasn't actually called a brownie. It was made at the Palmer House in Chicago, but it wasn't called a brownie until many years later. So I decided to go with the first recipe that is called a brownie and has chocolate in it, though even then there were two recipes published at the same time that fit the bill, so I just picked one. It comes from the Service Club cookbook published in Chicago, Illinois in 1904, and it's for Bangor brownies. Cream 1/2 cup of butter, 1 cup sugar, add 2 squares, 1/4 cake baker's chocolate, melted, 2 eggs, 1/2 cup pastry flour, and 1/2 cup chopped walnuts. Spread on baking tins and bake 15 minutes in a moderate oven. So already 120 years ago, we have basically all of the ingredients of the modern day brownie. It's just that the ratios are a little bit different. But at least the recipe gives us exact measurements so we can recreate what it would have been like. Except there is one measurement that is a bit of a head scratcher, and that is the 2 squares or 1/4 cake baker's chocolate. Well, how much is a square? Or actually, how much was a square in 1904? Because the Baker Chocolate Company has been around since 1780, and surely during that period of time, the quantities of their packaging have changed. And they have, because when I went to buy Baker's chocolate, which you can still buy today at the store, it came in a 4-ounce package. But in 1904, it came in an 8-ounce package, so we know that a quarter of the cake would have been 2 ounces, and so each square is 1 ounce. So for this recipe, what you'll need is 2 ounces or 57 grams of Baker's unsweetened chocolate. Then a 1/2 cup or 115 grams of salted butter, 1 cup or 200 grams of sugar, 2 eggs, a 1/2 cup or 60 grams of pastry or all-purpose flour, and a 1/2 cup or 60 grams of chopped walnuts. And once you have all of your ingredients measured out, you are ready to start cooking, which is something that I really appreciate from today's sponsor, HelloFresh, because when you get a package from HelloFresh, all of the ingredients are already measured out, so you just open that box and you can get right to cooking. Like last night, I made the street cart style turkey bowls, which were fantastic. They were so flavorful and they only took 20 minutes to make. And I love that they give you the opportunity to customize your meals. Like instead of rice, I could have had cauliflower rice. I didn't, I had the regular rice, but it's nice to have the option. And they have a lot of different options in swapping things out. You can swap out the protein or the vegetables. And they have lots of meals to choose from that you can customize, whether you're a meat lover, a vegetarian, pescatarian, or just looking for a recipe that's quick and easy. And they even have breakfast items, like spinach and feta egg bites. And right now you can get free breakfast for life when you click my link in the description or visit HelloFresh.com and use code FREETASTINGHISTORY. That's 1 free breakfast item per box while the subscription is active. Just visit HelloFresh.com and use my code FREETASTINGHISTORY. And now we are back to the brownies. So this recipe says to cream the butter and sugar together. Often today you melt the butter for brownies, but this has you cream them. Let the butter soften and then begin to beat it until it's nice and smooth, and then add the sugar and mix until it becomes creamy and fluffy. And then we need to melt our chocolate. So you just heat a couple of inches of water in a saucepan to boiling, and then set the chocolate in a heat-safe bowl on top of the pot, making sure that the bottom isn't actually touching the water. As it melts, give it a couple stirs, and it should be ready in a couple minutes. Then pour that into the creamed butter and mix. You want to mix for a minute or two to make sure that everything is well incorporated, but also to let the chocolate cool, because once you add the egg, if it is still hot, it will scramble the egg, and that's no good. So after a couple minutes, add the eggs and mix until they're fully incorporated, and then you can add half of the flour and gently mix it in, then add the other half and continue to mix. And once everything is mixed together, stir in your walnuts. Then your batter is ready, and you can butter and line an 8 by 8 inch baking pan with parchment and pour the batter in, making sure it spreads into the corners evenly. Then set the pan in the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, 175 Celsius for 20 minutes. The recipe says for 15 minutes, but I checked on mine at 15 minutes and it was still pretty much liquid on the inside. You don't want to overbake them though. You don't want, when you put a knife in and pull it out, you don't want it to be dry. You want kind of a gooiness to come out, but it shouldn't be liquid. Once they're ready, set them on a wire rack to cool for 5 minutes, then turn out the brownies and let them cool completely before cutting them into squares. Now, like I said, this is one of the oldest recipes that is actually called a brownie that has chocolate. But a decade before this, another chocolatey, fudgy treat made its debut at the Chicago World's Fair. The year is 1893, and Chicago is playing host to the White City, home of the world's Columbian Exposition. Here you will marvel at the debut of George Ferris's Great Wheel, and you can tantalize your taste buds with new inventions like Juicy Fruit Gum and Pabst Blue Ribbon Beer. And for a select few, they would get to try a square of chocolatey, fudgy goodness that was not yet called a brownie. So if you ever visit the massive Palmer House Hotel in Chicago, which I did last year, and it is pretty spectacular, you will be inundated with stories of the first brownie being made at the Palmer House, and it is still made there today, and you can actually order it. And I ordered it and ate it, and it was delicious. Not really a brownie the way that I would usually get it. It was much more dense, much more chocolatey, but still really, really good. So their claim that they invented it actually begins with the socialite and businesswoman Bertha Honore Palmer, a woman described as beautiful, dashing, quick, and smart, and more than that, she was sure of herself. So it's no wonder that in 1891 she was selected to lead the board of lady managers for the upcoming World's Columbian Exposition, the World's Fair. These ladies were to oversee the construction of the Woman's Building and organize the World's Congress of Representative Women. This building was planned, designed, and decorated entirely by women, something rather unheard of at the time, and it was said that it will be a long time before such an aggregation of woman's work, as may now be seen in the Woman's Building, can be gathered from all parts of the world again. It's also worth noting that of the 12 main buildings at the exposition, the one entrusted to the Board of Lady Managers was the first to actually get constructed, no doubt due to the efficacy of one Bertha Honore Palmer. But what does this have to do with brownies, you say? Well, the story goes that during their meetings, they wanted to have meals, but Bertha didn't want them taking away time to have a full meal brought in with servants and yada yada yada. So she asked her staff, her kitchen staff at the Palmer Hotel, to put together a box lunch for the ladies, and this would need to include a dessert that was smaller than a piece of cake and wouldn't require a fork to be eaten. Thus born was the Palmer House brownie. It was a dense, chocolatey square topped with an apricot glaze and walnuts. And it was such a hit that it was not only served to the occasional guest of the World's Fair, but also to those who visited the Palmer House, where it is still served to their guests today. Now, this is the story that is told by the Palmer House today, and I have no reason to believe that it's not true, but I couldn't find any, period documentation that confirmed it, but still, great story. And they will actually give you the recipe for this brownie. But they say that it hasn't changed, and it is the original recipe. But it is definitely not the original recipe because it's written in a very modernized format, so who knows how it's changed. Maybe it hasn't changed at all, but knowing how recipes work over 130 years, I'm pretty sure it's probably changed in some way. So I decided not to make that one. I decided to go with the one from 1904 that we're making today. Also, that original Palmer House brownie was definitely not called a brownie. So where did the term come from? Well, it turns out in the late 1800s, the word brownie was everywhere. It was a really big thing, probably because of a book published in 1887 by Canadian author Palmer Cox. The book was called The Brownies, Their Book. And it was all about these little fairy-like goblins who come out at night in people's homes and sometimes help with the chores, and at other times play little pranks on them. These brownies were actually a part of Scottish folklore, and they went back for centuries, but Palmer's book gave them a new jolt of popularity, especially here in North America. One thing to know about these brownies is that Basically, they did work around the house. They were like little elves, little house elves. And if you ever wanted to get rid of one, you did so by giving it clothes. Seems familiar, yeah? Specifically, the clothes were called a brownie suit, and they became very popular with young boys at the time. In the 1897 Sears Roebuck catalog, there's an ad for brownie suits for children. Just the thing for a boy's everyday go-as-you-please suit. Our brownie suits will delight your boy. They are worn everywhere this season. Our price per suit, 50 cents. Also, I love looking at these old catalogs. Just the pictures alone are amazing. Look at these fancy little lads. I will put a link to where you can look at the whole catalog down in the description. It could take you hours. Another thing to know about these brownies is that, yes, while they did help out with chores from time to time, they also had a habit of stealing things, specifically keys. They might take your keys, and the only way to get those keys back was to leave a little treat, a little piece of cake or candy for the brownie. This was called Brownie's food, and it is perhaps the inspiration for the name of a confection sold in that same 1897 edition of the Sears Roebuck catalog, where they are listed under fancy crackers, biscuits, etc., and were sold in 1-pound papers for 14 cents. The first brownie that we do know what was actually in the recipe is from Fannie Farmer's original 1896 Boston Cooking School cookbook. But while it bears the name of the brownie and is cake-like, it's made not with chocolate, but with molasses. And so the question is, did it get the name brownie from these sprites, these little fairies, or was it just because it was brown? Or maybe it was a little bit of both. Who knows? It's a little more clear for a later recipe from 1899, where the Macias cookbook has a recipe for Brownie's food, clearly named after the characters. And here I feel like we are getting closer to what we would call a brownie today, because instead of molasses, it gets its color and flavor from chocolate. But the chocolate is not part of the cake, rather it is a plain cake layered with chocolate ganache and a creamy frosting on top. The next time we see an evolution in brownie technology, it is in 1904 with the recipe that we're making today, and this is where we get to the second origin story for the brownie. Supposedly, it was in Bangor, Maine, and there was a housewife who was making a chocolate cake, but she forgot to put in the baking powder, and so when it came out of the oven, it was just flat, gooey, chocolatey goodness. But if you're actually just forgetting the baking powder, that is not how that would turn out, because all the other ratios of ingredients are totally off. You would just end up with a very flat cake. But still, maybe the story has some merit. And I say that because this is not the only brownie that is called the Bangor brownie. There were a lot of different brownies during this time period that had the moniker of Bangor brownie. Also, I had to look up how to say that word, Bangor, because I've heard it banger before, but I was like, I want to see how people from Bangor say it. And so I ended up finding this wonderful video on YouTube from Bangor, Maine, that is like a public service announcement in the form of song explaining that it is pronounced Bangor, not banger. It's really, really good. You should watch it because the song is a banger. Anyway, over the years, brownies started to kind of become the same thing. And it is the Bangor brownie style that we see evolving into the 1920s and 30s and beyond, even to today. Really, the only thing that would ever change is the ratios of the different ingredients. Once in a while, you see these recipe outliers that add other things, like there's the cream cheese brownie, and some of them I saw had cherries in them from one period. There is a 1926 recipe that has raisins. I love raisins, but I think putting raisins in a brownie should be punishable by at least some time in prison. But overall, brownies haven't really changed all that much. I know Katharine Hepburn had a recipe for brownies where she just cut the flour to like less than a quarter of a cup, and she said that made them super gooey, and now you can make them with a shiny top in different ways. I think that's mostly by melting the butter. It helps to do that. Variations, but essentially a brownie is a brownie is a brownie, and we're going to see if that's always been the case by trying these 1904 brownies. And here we are, the first recipe for chocolate brownies. So they smell like brownies. They look like brownies, though not as dark as the brownie that I would prefer, but I've seen brownies this color before. Very dull top. It is cracked like a modern brownie. Very dull top. It doesn't have that shininess. But everything else looks the same. Let's give it a try. I love brownies so much, you guys. I don't know how to express my adoration for this food. Even the worst brownie I've ever had, haven't had one with raisins, but every other brownie, even when it's really cakey, which is not my favorite, I still freaking love them. I like a more gooey, like fudgy brownie. And this is more along those lines. It's not as gooey as some today, but it's dense without being too heavy. It is chewy. It is chocolatey, more chocolatey than I expected given the amount of chocolate in it. I would probably add another square, personally, but this is a brownie. It really hasn't changed much in 120 years. I'm very, very happy with them, and I will be eating all of them probably tonight. I need to go buy some milk because I can't eat them without milk. They're just so good. So make these brownies. Go buy some brownies. Do whatever you have to do to get some brownies in your life, because life is better with brownies. And I will see you next time on Tasting History.